All right. So before we, so the way that we do this is we have a pretty open discussion about the books that we read. And we do it over, in this case, we're going to do it over a 5 week period. So it's a relatively leisurely pace, and uh, we get into quite a few discussions. But one of the things that I always feel sensitive about is not everybody always has time to do the reading in a particular week, but that doesn't mean that you can't participate in the discussion and that you can't benefit and that you can't contribute. So one of the things I just wanted to talk for, particularly for those who might not have had a chance to pick it up yet, I wanted to talk about a couple of things very quickly that are going on in the introduction and chapter one. And for those of you who've read it, you see that the author Stephen Phillips starts out telling a story. As Robin said, a lot of this is about sharing stories and telling stories. And the author starts out with a story of a white woman and her son, who, like many Americans, decide that they're going to go visit Washington, D.C. and see the sights there. And he describes them. He describes where they came from. I think it was Tennessee, uh, and what they're doing. But it doesn't take too long to find out that we find out that these visitors actually participated in the January 6th insurrection. And he talks about that, and you don't really know that that's actually happening until he gets into that. But he uses it to talk about this concept of choosing between democracy and whiteness, and the fact that there is an unfortunately large number of people, and a surprisingly large number of people in our country, where it appears that if they were given the choice of democracy versus whiteness, they might pick whiteness. And then he talks about the history of the country going back to the Civil War. And he essentially says, that was a choice that was being made at the time that the Civil War was being fought as well. And even though the South lost the war, people were still not giving up on that concept of whiteness and white supremacy. And he talks a little bit about the history after the Civil War in terms of how the North and the politics at the time led to a certain amount of appeasement of the Confederates as a way of trying to move things forward. But the point is that the Confederates, or I like to call them anti-progressives, don't want to move forward. And it's something that we're still living with now. And that is the premise of the book. So he says in the introduction towards the end, he has two purposes in writing this book. One is to show how we are still engaged in the continuation of the Civil War, and which is fairly depressing. But he throughout the book, he lays out his basis for actually making that assertion. And then in the second part of the book, he talks about how we can succeed in winning this war despite the obstacles. So that is that's kind of the book in a nutshell, or the introduction in a nutshell. He provides a lot of detail. I really do hope, if you haven't had a chance to get through it, I found it quite captivating. In chapter one, he continues this discussion of the Civil War, and he basically lays out why the Confederacy, even though it surrendered in the war, still somehow was able to succeed in keeping in place the very things that the war was all about, slavery and white dominance. I mean, he describes again throughout the book, but lays it out in chapter one, their playbook. He calls it the Confederate playbook. And it's divided into different things. He says, they never give an inch. Even if they've lost, they will never give an inch. They will ruthlessly rewrite laws to get some kind of advantage. They will distort public opinion in terms of what the facts actually are. They will silently sanction terrorism. He mentions the Ku Klux Klan in that context. And then he describes something that they call he calls playing the long game, that they are so firm in their convictions, that they have strategies for playing this out as long as possible. And so the rest of the book, and in greater detail in chapter 1, he talks about those concepts within the Confederate playbook. So I just wanted to share that just at the beginning, to get us all kind of on the same page before we get into the discussion questions. And Wes, Robin, Anna, anybody, it might be nice to just jump in, and if there was a theme that they thought that they wanted to share, I thought that would be good before we get into the questions.
I think you got it covered. That was excellent.
Yep. Thank you, Jamel. And Robin is going to kick us off with our discussion.
Alrighty. So first question, how has the progressive movement been shaped by history? Like Jamel mentioned, the book kind of starts out taking us through the history, starting with the Civil War from the Confederate perspective, but how has the progressive movement been shaped by history? Anyone have any thoughts? Peg, I'm gonna go ahead and ask you to unmute.
Thanks, Robin. I don't know if I would say that it was shaped so much through history, but I think it was shaped because of history. And that if we wouldn't have had the events specifically leading up to the Civil War, so even pre-Civil War, and the Civil War and Reconstruction, and then all of the events that have unfolded since then, I don't think that the progressive movement would be as necessary as it has been.
That's a great point, Peg. Thank you.
Thank you for letting me share, Robin.
Jane, I see you have your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, yes, I just, I think it hit me when he mentions on page 9 that it's a losing battle to challenge us all to learn to live in a multiracial nation. Then I feel like that everything that I've read just in the introduction and in chapter 1, we're living today. So the history hasn't changed. Our ability to look back on it, and now we can, read from these smart writers who've been able to put it down in a formula for us to see. And that's how I feel like. I still feel like even the current administration is under the who was it, Scholl or Shore, who the populist who made a point to talk about, let's do polls and find out what's popular, and let's stay with those topics and not, really delve into, the hard stuff, like, this is happening. And I see it playing out in our administration today. So it's good to be able to see it. I can't really say there's a progressive movement if there's no movement, because I feel like we're reliving history all over again. And if I feel that way, how much more so the people that are directly affected by all of this must feel. So
Thank you, Jane.
thank you.
Does anyone else have any thoughts that they'd like to share? Robin. I love your name. I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
Okay, when I get off this call, I don't want you to think it's because of the subject matter. I have another Zoom meeting, number one. Number two, I have yet to get the book. I ordered it yesterday and it's being delivered in the next 24 hours. I'm curious to know, is the author Black or white? Or any, what ethnicity is the writer?
So Steve Phillips is African American. I will drop a link in the chat for his organization, Democracy in Color. This is actually his second book, and he also hosts a podcast, Democracy in Color, about trying to maintain and further democracy, uphold democracy, and furthering progressive ideals with the lens of constituents of color.
Okay,
So
and for those who are wondering, why did I ask the ethnicity? Because there's a different framing or a different experience as being Black in America, especially with what's happening now, whether it's laws being written into the legislature, and by hook or crook, we're gonna make sure we stay in power type thing. So it's that was my curiosity there for those who might be curious why. I'm concerned about that. Now, I guess to say something, the last thing that I'll say in reference to progressive or not. Peg, thank you for acknowledging that there is a different type of experience that I'm gonna have about what's going on now, about January 6th, about things that are being written than others who might be on the sideline. And sometimes I think that sometimes people feel like, well, it's not me, but if you're not part of the solution, it kind of helps continue the problem. So sometimes I think as all of us begin to really understand where we are in this country, I have been literally at the beginning of Trump's presidency, I really thought I saw a similar or campaigning, not presidency, campaigning. I saw signs of when I was in Washington, D.C., and there's a video in one of the Smithsonian's about how the rise of Hitler came about. And I saw such a parallel, it was the same to me. And I have been concerned, not even concerned, I really have been, we're on it. It's a warning. It's a warning. This really is a warning. This is no joke. This is for real. So I think I like the fact that there is a conversation being had in reference to where we are now. So thank you. I'm sorry I took about 50 minutes on that. Thank you for letting me share.
thank you for sharing, Robin. Mary, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
I think that that there is a progressive movement, but we keep sliding back and trying to go forward, and it seems like there's this unstable, slippery slope that we're on right now. But that doesn't mean that we don't exist. That there is a movement. We had Obama as president. We have Kamala Harris as vice president now. And I think that, you know, even though it may seem like it's symbolic and that the same struggles exist, I think it's a lot different because the awareness level has changed and public opinion may be split 50-50 or 48-52, but we're on that slippery slope that we have to try even harder as progressives to talk to other people, to organize stronger and be a battering rod to change public opinion. Because the way I see it, the Civil War never ended. There were the Black Codes, the redemption, And I think that this, Southern white redemption never stopped. And Trump was an example of a phenomenon that I think he mentioned an election in, I forgot who the two candidates were, where they were threatening to kill each other unless the vote was stopped so that they could show their candidate winning. And then he also mentioned redemption and restoration. So I think that we're between redemption, and we can have redemption for African Americans and slavery and the farm worker movement and the millions that were deported and cheated of their pay and died without being reimbursed. I mean, those are abuses that were systematic abuses, and we seem to be headed in that direction. But I think we can turn the tide through an amped up progressive movement. I don't know if I made myself clear.
Thank you for sharing, Mary.
Okay.
Shannon, I'm gonna ask you to unmute. And then after Shannon, we have Felicia, and then we're gonna have to move on to the next question.
Okay. I'm in Little Rock, Arkansas, where today Sarah Huckabee Sanders' big omnibus bill, Arkansas Learns, dropped. 144 pages of how she intends to remake education in Arkansas. And it was chilling. My daughter is a school librarian, and they want to lock up school librarians who have on their shelves banned books and who make the library a safe place for LGBTQ students and faculty, as it turns out in her case. They have shared with her too. And when I picked up this book, I thought, that's the Civil War that they're talking about. It's the one we're in right now. And what I found out is it's not. It's still the same old Civil War. And not to belittle the Black experience, but it's true. You don't do anything when they come after somebody else, then eventually it comes to you. And here we are. So I was so struck when Jamal went through the Confederate playbook, because that's exactly what they're doing here.
Thank you for sharing, Shannon. Felicia, I'm gonna ask you to unmute, and hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If not, please correct me if you wouldn't mind.
It's Felita, and that's okay. And I'll be quick because of time. I just wanted to, first of all, I'm waiting for my book. I went 2 weeks ago and I'm still waiting for it. So hopefully I get it soon. But I wanted to just make a quick point that the progressive movement is history. It is happening, and it's been happening over and over. And it happens in the sense that we reach milestones. We don't celebrate them enough, so that we think we're going backwards, but we're not, in my opinion. I just feel that once we got, in my opinion, an African-American in the White House, all of this broke loose like this, but it's because of our progressive movement. But we've had those with Martin Luther King, with different aspects. So it's a celebration of a sort, and the fight was never over, and it's still not over. But at the same time, I just want to say that the movement is happening, but it's continued to happen. So it's not history yet. We have the rest of the story to tell.
I love the way you put that. History is not over, and we have the rest of the story to tell. That's beautiful. Alrighty, Jamel, sorry. Wanna go ahead with the
Yeah,
next
I
question?
know. Well, we'll go on to the next question. Can you hear me? Am I on mute? You can hear me, okay. But just something that Felita just said reminded me, Robin and Wes, of the thing that I pointed out to you, I think yesterday. There's a congressman in Texas, Colin Allred, Democrat. I think he's from Dallas, African American, and he was asked by the host, James Carville and others, what how he viewed America's racist past and how he was dealing with it. And one of the things that I was struck by is he said, there is still so much work that needs to be done. And yet at the same time, he being in the South and a legislator in the South said, but progress has been made. We have made progress. And I think, Felita's point about, trying to recognize that despite all of the obstacles and despite the fact that it's a continuing war, there have been achievements. So I took that as a positive, and I think that that's something that the progressive movement does need to think about. It's tough to keep spirits up with everything going on, and you see progress being eroded. But you can't. Some progress has been made, but there's still so much that needs to be done. So I'm really glad that you raised that, because I was hoping to be able to make reference to that thing that I had heard.
Yeah, I think we should go to question 3
Yep.
next.
Question 3?
Mhm.
Okay. What does an effective progressive playbook look like? What are the barriers to creating, implementing, and maintaining a progressive playbook? And I'll just throw this out. If we see what he describes as the Confederate playbook, and he puts that down in detail, what should an effective progressive playbook look like in comparison?
Anyone have any thoughts? So I will prime the pump, I guess. I think that one of the difficulties in maintaining a progressive playbook is that with part of the definition of being progressive, we are trying to invite more people to the table. So there are a lot of other ideas, a lot of priorities, a lot of things to be considered, and how do we make space for all of those? So Alan, I see you have your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Oh, okay. Hi. I have read a lot of his book already, and my wife and I talk about it constantly in terms of the local politics here in Florida. It's the grassroots organization. When I look at a progressive playbook, just like the Confederate playbook, it's a grassroots organization. It's effective leadership, because they have that. We hate to admit it, but they have that, especially here in Florida, where they've gained slowly over 20 years control of the Florida House and Senate, and they can do anything they want now, literally, and it's scary. But we need to fight back with a grassroots organization, effective leadership like Stacey Abrams in Georgia, and we may have to start playing our own long game, because it's going to take a while for us to organize. And but we can't just sort of sit still and wait for someone else to do it, or wait for it to happen. And sometimes when I look at the Florida Democratic Party, no offense to anyone who might be here from the Florida Democratic Party, but sometimes I'm at meetings and it sounds more like a social club, and I don't see much action. And I think they feel stymied because of what the Republicans have done. That's about it. I don't want to take up all your time, but
Thank you for sharing, Alan. Amelia, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
I think something very, very critical is voter registration, voter mobilization, particularly voter awareness, young people, I mean, when we did those letter writing campaigns, it really made a difference. And I think that's I think that's essential part of a progressive playbook. And you do it in a nonpartisan way, but you reach out. I mean, you're writing letters. You're getting someone to pick up something. Oh, gee, I haven't registered to vote. Maybe I should register to vote. Because I think that's a very important concrete. I get discouraged. I'm very glad. I think it was Felicia.
Felita?
What she said. Say again.
Felita, I think.
Alita, yeah, I that made me feel better because I think the reaction, the extremes of the reaction and how Trump licensed that, sometimes I wonder if that's because the progressive movement has gained some ground. You know, is it this, you know, clinging to old ideologies where you're threatened, and the only way to undo that threat is to educate and you know, just get your rank and file people to express their views, rather than look at the radical right and the race as a big lump that intimidates. Okay, put them aside, and where can I concentrate on you know, energies, you know, to address not so much countering them as much as just enlightening other people in general, because they're going to be there no matter what, you know. And I think the more I think the more ground progressives gain and or just the more awareness people have of racial injustice, I think that becomes a rallying cry against all of that. And they're very monolithic, and they're very it's a very like you said, it's a Hitler rhetoric, you know. It's very simplistic. It's very black and white, you know. There's and it's appealing, but I don't think that it can appeal in the long run.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing. I like your point about putting our energy towards enlightening others as opposed to so much energy into countering the right. Jane, I see you have your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Yeah, I really need to hear this positive side. I'm feeling a little militant these days because I am in Texas. So I really appreciate the call to keep it positive and to find the light in the darkness. So I will endeavor to remember that. But I also know that what is frustrating me beyond words is my fear that, excuse me, with everything that's going on, especially in our schools, the removal of books from our shelves, it is so important for enlightening to come through information. Well, they're denying us access to even that information now, and our kids. And so I think about what I'm reading about history, and I think about where we are now, and I think about where are we going to be if this continues? And I don't really know what to do at this point. So I'm hoping that this is chapter 1, that by the end, I will have a better idea of a playbook that I can take hold of and really make a positive difference.
Thank you for sharing, Jane.
Thank you.
Felita, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
I was going to respond to the progressive movement, but I wanted to respond to Jane real quick. What we talked about a minute ago, what we're seeing has happened before. There's been times when we couldn't get books and we had to go off and read them on our own. So don't get too depressed. Just because that one avenue might close, it doesn't mean that we won't have others. We've progressed enough to where we'll figure out ways to educate ourselves. But I think the bigger part that we were talking about with the progressive movement is once we all know what it looks like collectively, I think it would be better to put it together.
Mary, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Thank you for sharing, Felita.
I think the the best recipe for a progressive movement to increase its momentum is be all inclusive, to be all welcoming, to expand sensitivity to everybody that within the organization, and to start with a community-based organization and don't detach from the national organization. If there's needs, like Stacey Abrams that started a momentum, but I think she got cut short because they started the lies about her, and she didn't come to her defense to counter those lies fast enough to be governor. And I think that the lies work, they keep working, and we have to be very cognizant of the fact that we have to project a positive platform. We have to answer not to the stuff on social media, but we have to project our truths independently and not answer to those lies, because you're just magnifying the lies through their AI and the way the social media is set up. They respond to emotional reaction. So we have to drop the emotional reaction, stop reacting to Trump, stop. It pisses me off that we're constantly revolving everything around who cares about this fool. We cannot make our movement around a racist, fascist, neo-Nazi individual, because he's a dead end. We need to, if we are all inclusive, we include LGBTQI, we include all the racial and religious ex-felons that come out of prison and did their time and want to restart in the community. We need to focus on the important issues, which is increase our voting power and cut the movement to block the voting power. We need to that's to me the big focus right now, to work on campaigns for progressive judges in different states and not just candidates. The judges are making our decisions. The judges are telling us that women are second-class citizens. The judges are saying that that African American and Latino X cannot have affirmative action anymore. So these are things, I think the courts are more important at this point than individual campaigns.
Thank you for sharing, Mary. Wes, gonna turn it over to you.
Yeah, this was an idea I was going to share, but I just want to call out that Robin Kelly put it in the chat, and all politics is local, community organizing. And I think that is part of the progressive playbook, but need to amplify that and bring it to all communities. Because I think it starts with local, and I think it kind of goes with, I believe, the previous speaker, kind of just talked about playing the long game. And I think we need to start investing in that long game. And, it kind of goes with what Mary's saying is we got to, expand the vote, and that happens locally. It doesn't happen it could happen at the national level, but how our system exists, it's not going to go that way, unfortunately. So that long game, in my personal opinion, is invest local, start local.
Mm-hmm. Ready, Jamel, you wanted to add to that?
Yes. So I was just going to say, when I look at like a response to the Confederate playbook, and I don't know if we put it in the chat, but I'm just going to post it right now. Exactly what he described as the Confederate playbook. Some of the responses to look at it and try to turn it on its end. That whole notion of, if the other side's operate, their modus operandi is never give an inch, recognize that that's the case, and double down sometimes, as opposed to trying to come up with that middle path forward. There are sometimes, yes, compromise is definitely necessary to make things work, but you have to get compromise from the other side. And if you're trying to get compromise from another side that is never going to give an inch, you find somebody else who actually is, and you try to divide them that way. Ruthlessly rewrite the laws. If they're writing bad laws, figure out ways to challenge them. I mean, they are bad laws. This notion of somebody coming in and trying to dictate education in such a way that really is squelching free speech. There are ways that progressives need to double down on that and figure out ways to challenge it. Hand out the books. I mean, somebody I think it was Felita who said books have been banned in the past. To a certain extent, banning a book is probably the best way to make kids want to read it, to be quite honest. And then distorting public opinion, fight back, with the truth, silently sanction terrorism, shed light on that, and then the same one that everybody else, play the long game. So I think that when he spells that Confederate playbook out and he's exposing it, that in and of itself can serve as a recipe for how progressives need to respond. I haven't finished the book yet, so I'm wondering if that's what comes up in his recipe in the end. I just started the second part where he's into how we win, but I love the way that he laid that out, because I feel it's something to respond to.
Yeah, thank you. Alexi, I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
Hi, everybody. Sorry I can't be on camera, but the Civil War, technically, and I love this book so far. I haven't finished it either, but I want to know, like thinking of the Depression and people who were the powers that be couldn't live with being poor. So now we're coming to a place where they're about to be the minority, because the minority are about to become the majority. I'm just wondering if what is the playbook going to look like when they really are the majority and they really are feeling threatened? I mean, because it's not even there yet exactly, but when it is exactly there, I mean, sometimes I feel like they'll blow up the earth, but I'm sorry, that's just what I'm, but I'm just wondering, does anybody feel or wonder what is going to happen exactly when the majority who really feel this way, and the Southern Playbook and all of that, what is it going to look like when they become the minority? I think it's going to become really, really, really bad and insidious, more so than it has ever been, because that has never been the case. It's never been the case where they were the minority. So now what's going to happen? What do you think?
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Alexi. Jamil, I see your hand up, but I'm gonna, if it's okay, ask Alan to unmute.
Hi, just to get on with Alexi. It's going to happen. It has happened in our history. It was during Reconstruction and the growth of the Ku Klux Klan, and the fight was very local, and it's going to be that kind of action by these militants, the militias that are out there in every state. There will be a backlash. Whether we can staunch it and not give in like they did after the after Reconstruction. I can only hope. But yeah, I mean, we've had that history. We should learn from it.
Yeah. Great point. Thank you, Ellen. Jamel, you wanted to share?
Yeah, just a couple of things. One, the author Stephen Phillips, and I think Mary mentioned it in the chat, has also written a book called "Brown is the New White," which came out I think about 6 years ago. And I listened to that one while I was reading this other one. And it's very interesting because he goes through the demographic shifts, and he basically uses a lot of math, and he explains, how, there is a new majority coming, and it's inevitable. And he talks about what that means and some of the fears that exist, but also that, there's, in the end, it's inevitable. It's going to happen, and it's not going to be, as fearful as everybody as people are making it out to be. The fear itself of what's going to happen when there is when our majority shifts is something that those with regressive political views try to use. They try to fan the fear, with respect to that. But you might as well say you need to be afraid of Mediterranean food or Chinese food or something like that. If you think about it, this country has evolved for many years, and the one thing constant is change. In the same way, we don't all eat the same type of sliced white bread anymore. We have a lot more options, and people seem to like the different options that they have. I think that we'll eventually get to a point where people feel less threatened. Some of that is happening. Just think about it this way in terms of what we call the battle of the sexes. Things have shifted. There's still a lot more work that needs to be done, but as a man, am I threatened by the fact that there are women in the workforce or that I have women bosses? Well, 50 years ago, that might have been the fear. What's going to happen? When all of these people, when society changes. But I think that talking about it and talking about the positives of change is a way to is potentially a way to help address those fears. At the same time, there are going to be some people who will continually use it to galvanize, and there you can't necessarily change that. You just have to be prepared for that and shed light on the fact that they're being manipulated with fear. Sorry to go on too long. Sorry.
No worries. Thank you for sharing, Jamel. I sent this message to Wes a little too late for him to be able to read it. We do have several questions left. We don't have much time, so forgive me, Wes. I'm going to take some liberty here. I'm going to read the remaining 3 questions, and you guys can maybe take 10-15 seconds to think about which one of the 3 you want to answer, and just give us your thoughts on that. We are running short on time, so I would ask when you answer to just try to be concise, so that we can have time for as many people to answer as possible. Question 4. Americans desperately need leaders who are grappling with Republicans' dangerous anti-democratic shift. This was a quote from Perry Bacon in the Washington Post. So the question is, how can progressives effectively address the persistence of a radical Confederate electorate? Is it more compromise that is needed? Should this be addressed through our representatives? In other words, putting pressure on progressive politicians, or should it be addressed through constituency? In other words, addressing the voters and those who are actually pushing for change.
Real
Question
quick,
5.
Robin. I forgot we still have 30 minutes.
Dang it, Wes, I asked, was it 9 or 9:30?
No, I'm in Central Time Zone, so yeah, and I'm not I'm a geography teacher, so so yeah, so Robin, let's pick what question you want to go with,
All right.
and let's go.
Well, we've already read 4, so let's go with 4. If anyone has any thoughts on that. So I think several of you in your comments have mentioned that the anti-democratic shift is part of the Republican long game. So how do we address that? Is it compromise? Is it through our legislators, or is it with us? Peg, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thank you, Robin. I don't know if it has to be either ourselves as constituents or our legislators, but shouldn't it be a joint effort, a mutual effort? That, again, it's not the voters against those who are in office, whether it's our same party with our same beliefs or not, but that the real strength lies in our unity, not in what divides us. And I'm not saying to not speak out or act against what is blatantly oppressive and repressive. But what I am saying is, I think the strength of our playbook, if you will, needs to come from our ability to mobilize and to embrace our diversity and to recognize that what makes us different from one another are the very things that make us strong as one body. And Confederacy, I don't know if the Civil War ever really ended. I think the Civil War started before the actual battles of the Civil War. But I will say this, aren't they united? And could the same be said about the other side, which would be us? How united are we as a general population on the other side of that? And for that, I wouldn't say I admire them or want to emulate them and their beliefs as much as their ability to mobilize. And it seems that hate has much more power than respect for one another as people.
That's a great point. Thank you, Peg. Alexi, I'm going to ask you to unmute, and then we'll have Darcy share after Alexi.
Okay, I feel like what we need to do, because a lot of these things that are happening and going on, and the ongoing civil war, these are people, and I see a lot of, in what I do, I'm a racial justice director, and what I see a lot, because I look at it, people are always like, well, that happened forever ago. That doesn't have anything to do with us now, but it actually always does. It does. And I feel like the young people, Gen Z, the younger generations, they actually are more aware, and they see adults behaving badly, because that's a lot of what keeps happening. And so, they said in the last election that, the Gen Z showed out and they voted accordingly. And so I feel like we really, sometimes some people's minds are made up and you can't tell them anything. And so I feel that some things that we need to do, and if you all are educators or if you are parents or anything, it's getting the young people involved, teaching them that, teaching them and putting them into the places. It's gonna take, because the older we're in this situation because of the older generations, the Gen X, it's not the millennials so much, but the Gen X and the boomers and the traditionalists and everybody else. It's time to bring up the younger people to understand that this is what we're facing. I mean, they're the ones whose education even is being challenged. And speaking of education, and I'm not going to go on long, but the laws that are taking place that are fear-mongering parents, that stuff was never taught in school anyway. It never was. It's so much stuff that you all and I never learned, and they're not learning it now, and they never were. So this is fake, made up BS. And so that fear mongering is some BS. And so what we need to do, and like you said with the banned book, somebody said it makes you want to read them. You need to start putting the Gen Z on the task of being like, you won't dumb us down, and tell them we won't be dumbed down. We're smarter than that. We have critical thinking skills, and we want our critical thinking skills. And so that is the thing. And also promoting them to get into politics. And that's what I feel. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing, Alexi. Darcy, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
I live in Minnesota, and so we have completely the different issues, because we have a trifecta right now, and so we have little opportunity or time to even have to worry about the problems as much as make our voices known about everything that can happen. Once the Democrats and the progressives have a voice, get the work done. And that is what we've been focusing on there. Our legislation has just been crazy, great, busy, fast, and we're getting it done. So I guess the best offering I can say is like, just ignore all the noise. Ignore it. We have too much work to do to like proclaim everything that we can do as progressives. And I just, I want to say that once you have the opportunity to express yourself, that's what we need to teach the next generation. And we just have to stay focused on it. And that's what they'll love to hear. I love this venue anyway, but thank you, Wes, for inviting me. This is awesome. And I'm sorry that you got the time mixed up, because I was freaking out that we had to be done already.
Me
So it's lovely
too,
being here.
Darcy,
Thank you so
me
much.
too.
So have the faith, guys. I mean, there's so many things. So let's not worry about all the shit. It's just too much going on. You know, like, let's just worry about all the good stuff that can happen when we're in power, and we will be in power. We will.
Alrighty, so since we do have more time, I will ask question 5. How can progressives use events of the past to strengthen their movement? And I'll give an example if that's okay. PBS had a documentary a few years ago about the first Rainbow Coalition, and this kind of ties back to what Alita said earlier about celebrating the wins. Watching that documentary was not only encouraging and inspirational, it was empowering. I'm not sure if everyone here has seen that documentary or heard about the Rainbow Coalition, but it was a group in Chicago that formed around Black Panthers, Young Lords, who were a political action group of Puerto Ricans, and white Southerners who had previously stuck with the Confederate flag and gave that up for cross-racial organizing and cross-racial coalition. in Chicago. So any other thoughts on how we can use the events of the past to strengthen our movement? I think that that first Rainbow Coalition definitely gives us, like we were saying, a source to look back on in terms of a playbook and how we can move forward. Any other thoughts?
I don't know why I'm pinned and you all have to see me. I'm trying to figure it out. But I do have a thought, and those who have joined past book clubs help. Darcy, you may know the answer, but I know in Minnesota, they actually very recently like a One Minnesota campaign, or there was some effort that involved, you know, grassroots organizations, the Minnesota Democratic Party, which they call themselves something besides Democrats, and I forgot what they call themselves, but and it was mentioned in our past book. So Jamel or Robin, Peg, I don't know, but that thought's going in my head, and I'm going to try to figure it out if someone can't help me. So
We have all our notes, so we'll have to look back on it and try to see if we can find it. So Robin, you have your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Oh, okay. I was reading the chats. So I kind of forgot kind of where I was. I think in essence, what I was going to say was that that's why we need to know our history. Everyone needs to know the history so we will not be doomed to repeat it. And I'd be damned if I'm going to repeat it.
Yeah, great point. Darcy, I see you have your hand up.
I do. I was just gonna say it's the Democratic Farmer Labor Party in Minnesota. And one thing that's been very effective in the last 2 years is we've kind of consolidated all the, you know, vote, run, lead. It is the One Minnesota, and it was actually put together by the Governor Walz campaign, where they brought into all the different activist groups and had their leaders visit with one another and find out where they could effectively reach in different areas, like the rural communities are one area that we had to do a lot of work with. So it was about bringing all the leaders with all the different activists together and the most effective one is this organization called Isaiah, which brought all the different faith leaders together, not just the monoclastic faith, but also, and that's important. And now as we're moving all this legislation forward during this session, this collaborative opportunity has just made it so much easier to get, you know, committees and people to talk. And we just have this vibrant list of people to go to reach out to. So it was a collaborative effort by the Governor Walz campaign to bring everybody together in One Minnesota, all the different progressive groups. Very effective.
Thank you, Darcy. Shannon, I see you have your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Okay, there we go. I was just following in the chat that people who were saying that maybe parents should stay out of the classroom. And I read a recent study that showed that only 1% of parents actually challenged anything that their children should be allowed to read out of the library when they were given that option. So I don't really think that there are that many people who want to interfere at that level. I think there are probably just as many or more who want their kids to read anything and everything. But I'd like the people who were talking in the chat to maybe elaborate when you use words like all or every or whatever, what are you seeing as the problems that are caused by parents getting involved in the classrooms, either in the curriculum or in the classroom?
Thank you. I would actually be really interested in seeing that statistic. It feels like, and I think someone else made the point that the squeaky wheel gets gets the oil. Sometimes it doesn't take many if everyone else stays by the sidelines, and those 1 or 2 people who are pushing the ball forward are getting that. I'm gonna skip down. I see we have a new commenter, Rebecca Weeks. I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
I think the primary place that we need to be concerned about and put some effort into, which many of you may know, and by the way, I'm a teacher in Las Vegas, is the school board efforts that the other folks have made in order to essentially take over school boards by force, either showing up and taking what I consider to be inappropriate action to waste time and make things more disruptive than necessary, or by making sure they filled up the electoral slates and got people on boards and now, can kind of hold hostage from within. And if you've been reading as I have, it's not as bad here as it is in some other places. But our board meetings here, and we're the 5th largest district in the nation, have been running 3 and 4 hours because of all of the comment. And the current Board of Trustees has changed the way that you can give public comment as a result of some of that. And certainly they're not perfect. I'm saying that as a taxpayer as well as a teacher in the system, but that is a major way for especially women and Black and brown folks to enter the political arena, get elected to that school board or the township committee or the city council, or just trying to think back to growing up in New Jersey because I haven't always lived out west, but the county commissioners, because that then gives you name recognition and experience on your resume so that you can move up in the hierarchy and run for bigger things if that's what you're interested in. And if you don't want to run yourself, then do what I've been doing since I was 3, I think, and go to all the events and support the people who do and walk door to door and so forth and so on. My mom started in local politics, and my father was a political science major, so she ended up running, not him. But I mean, I'm 57 now, and I spent my days as a child in the political process in Cranford, New Jersey. So, and in the county there, Union County. And it's very disruptive to school systems in general. And they have the purse strings then, the superintendent can make decisions about what we teach, when we teach, how we teach, and what parents are able to do. But especially in these states that you guys have been talking about, Texas, Florida, etc., that's the way to get an in and reverse some of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Alexi, I'm going to ask you to unmute, and then we're going to go to Jane.
Yeah. Sometimes, some of the comments and some of the things, like, I think what needs to be said is exactly like the book said, the Civil War never ended. These things are set up this way, and they are meant to be this way. It's exactly how they want it to be. And I'm so extremely disappointed as a person of color because, when they do it and they like the bands and everything else, it is treating us again, treating us again like we don't count, like we don't matter, like our voices don't matter, like we're to be discounted, like we're stupid, like it's just so many things. And so if you are an educator or if you are and deal with children of color, it's like, how are we supposed to feel? How are our kids supposed to feel? How are our kids supposed to feel being erased like that, or being that our history doesn't matter, or that it never, and I'm going to keep it 100%, like I said before, it never really was taught in the first place. So their attempts at erasing, and this has been done before and done before and done before again. Every time Black people make a step forward, there's 2 steps backwards because of the backlash. And so the Black Lives Matter and the, movement towards equality after George Floyd and all that, that's the 2 steps backward. It didn't happen just now. With the voting in of Barack Obama, there was the backlash with that. They created the Tea Party, which is now the maggots. And so now, it's 2 steps forward, 10 steps back.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off there. Just given time, I'm gonna go ahead and
Okay, I'm
ask,
sorry. I'm
James.
sorry, because I get passionate. I understand. Sorry.
You.
Sorry, are you at me now?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I was just going to respond to an earlier comment. It is happening in the schools here, and we didn't have one. We did not have one progressive person running for school board at all in my county. The people running their party is called the Mama Bears. So that's what we're up against right now at least in my county in the state of Texas. And thank you to the other commenter who said, get elected to the school board to support those running. So I think maybe I can make it a mission now to go out and seek people who are would be good candidates for running and be willing to do so. It's becoming more difficult. And on that same note, I think that's why I would hope that eventually there will be at some point more federal legislation, whatever it's going to take, so that states cannot continue to repeat this rewriting history and make these devastating laws, because it is coming in spades from all directions for us here in Texas. And I know we're not the only ones. So I would hope that, it's going to take all of it working together for sure. But I really feel like there's got to be a red line with somebody somewhere, that this can't continue just to keep perpetuating and going on like this. That's all. Except I do want to say one more thing. I would like to say, a little awkwardly perhaps, that I appreciate as a white person so much being included in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Alrighty, we're gonna try to blow through question 6 really quickly. Take just 5 minutes on that, because I know Wes has some wrap-up slides we need to get to. How do you think the author's comparisons are received across the political spectrum, particularly with moderate voters? How will this framing impact collaborative organizing? And Shannon, I'm not sure if that was just from when your hand was up before. Jamel, I think you have something you wanted to add for that one.
Yeah. So the one thing that concerned me about the author's approach is that, the more I appreciate the parallels to the Confederacy and the Civil War, And he focuses a lot on, what's happening in he points out the parallels in terms of what's actually happening in the states that were part of the Confederacy. He says numerically, you look at them and you see that this is where some of the worst stuff is happening. But I get that, and I think it's actually very important. I do feel like there's more to it than that. I mean, you've got anti-progressives or regressives in the North. You've got issues that you're dealing with in terms of people people afraid of the browning of America in the Northeast or in the Rust Belt as well. And when I heard that congressman from Texas say the South has actually made some progress despite where it came from, I feel like there's more to it than just focusing on the Confederacy. And in terms of how this gets discussed, I actually worry a little bit about using that, just painting people as Confederates, when I guess I would just say anti-progressive or regressive, or something. I don't know. I was trying to, that concerns me a little bit, in terms of this book. Nothing. I mean, I like the book a lot. It's just when I think about how to discuss it with other people, that's something that I'm mindful of.
Anyone else have any thoughts they want to share really quickly before we wrap up? Robin, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Okay, thank you. Is it Jamil or Jamal? How do I say your name?
You can just call me Potato or something. Jamel.
No, it's
Jamel.
because it looks like it's
I
Jamal.
I say Jamel. Some of my closest friends call me Jamal, and so I
That's
answer
a
to both.
cultural thing, then.
Yeah, but it is not Jamil. But it's
'cause
Jamel or Jamal. I go to both of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I understand that you say you kind of. This is what I will say. It reminds me. I concur with the use of Confederacy. I concur with that. It might turn some people off, but you need to understand. Not you. One needs to understand that I need to use the language that it is. So you understand the atrocities. So you understand the what's really happening. So when you go in and whitewash slavery or enslavement of a people to mean servitude, that's easing it. Confederacy for me brings what it is. Do you know what the Ku Klux Klan means to me? I mean, it's not somebody riding by my house and saying, I don't like you or whatever. There is an atrocity with it. There is a venom with it. And I don't care how it makes some people feel uncomfortable. It is what it is. I'm sorry. No, I'm not. I just told somebody else, don't apologize. No, I'm not sorry. That's why I feel like it's the usage of that for me.
Yeah, I understand. I definitely appreciate what you're saying.
Thank you, Robin. I'm gonna ask Mary to unmute, and then we'll have Charisse, and then I think we'll probably need to wrap up after that.
Just to say that sidestepping the real issue of institutionalized racism and whiteness that has dominated the country since day one is you can't sidestep the issue, and confrontation doesn't have to necessarily be threats of violence. The other side uses violence. January 6th was all about violence. The Congress people and the Republican Party that motivated people to do this January 6th break-in, that was directed attack on the Capitol. And we're constantly sidestepping what's the real crux of why things aren't changing at the pace that they should change, calling Mexicans rapists and drug dealers and shithole countries. Trump was as direct as could be, but he was not offensive. But if we come and we say as progressives XYZ, we're offensive. We have to sidestep everything that we do, and it's time that the show's got to stop right here. we have things to do. We have major issues. Climate change is going to drown us all, and we're not even going to be able to swim out of it. So there are things that we got to focus on quickly and cut the bull, in my opinion, because that's really where it's at.
Thank you, Mary. Sharice, I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
Hi, my name's Sharice. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. And I just wanted to say that I feel it's extremely important that we engage young people. I feel that they don't understand the process. They don't understand, a lot of times some don't understand government. They don't understand how it works. They don't understand how it can impact them. So I feel that education should be in the schools, because I did have teachers when I was growing up that definitely impacted me. And it's those teachers that just push the bar. So I feel that restraining those teachers, that's a really big problem. And I think that we should have more community-based organizations that focus on education about government, education on how local government works, how federal government works, because people just don't, they're busy with life and they don't really understand how it can impact them, and they have lost hope. So I feel like starting with young people, but as well as parents, and just educating them on the process and being more inclusive in this process, because we don't reach out to everyone. I don't get surveyed frequently, so a lot of the voices aren't heard. So I think that that's one thing where we can start, is with educating on the process and engaging not only young, like Gen Z. I know someone said Gen Z, I agree with that 100%, but millennials, just making sure it's inclusive for everyone to know how it impacts their lives. Being a part of the process impacts their lives, and also having a historic, having a knowledge base of history, so you understand how it all works. And this is not new, and that this is something that's been going on, and we do have to be proactive, but it does start with being part of the process and being engaged. And that's pretty much all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Sharice. Wes, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to you.
Appreciate the discussion from everyone. I know it is 9:30 Eastern, and hope that you all will stay on for give me 5 more minutes. I did put it in the chat, but I feel like it hasn't been said. In regard to question 6, do you think the parallels the author is drawing to the Civil War are persuasive to moderates? Does that matter? And for me personally, I really feel like before we can even worry about moderates, do we have all progressives agreeing on the seriousness of the issue and where it currently is? Because if we can't get all progressives and Democrats to agree that this Civil War is still going on, we're never going to win. We have to be united and together. And then as we do that, moderates and even some conscious, conservatives will join us as well. So